Hello and welcome, everybody. Thanks for being with us today. As many of you know, I'm in Park City, Utah, broadcasting live. And Shanna, where are you?
I'm based in Central France.
In Central France. So thanks for staying up with us today and joining. Just a little bit of Zoom housekeeping, as you're all accustomed to. We can't hear or see you, but we welcome and encourage any questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. We have a lot of people joining us today. And I'm super happy to share with you is it Shanna Vida or just Shanna?
You can call me Shanna.
Shanna's fine. And as many of you know, we had in 2019, 250 people at the United Nations, all about impact. And it's not because I did the conference. It was glorious because people actually left there and did things. And one of the things that you're going to learn today from Shanna is that she's actually doing things as opposed to talking how bad things are. So thank you again for sharing your time with us today. And with that, please feel free to ask any questions that you'd like in the chat box or the Q&A. Like I said, we'll get to as many as possible. And welcome, Shanna. Please take it away.
Thank you very much. So yeah, my name is Shanna Gavron, and I'm the CEO of Endangered Wildlife. To give a little bit of background and to put in perspective what we're doing, I have a double master's degree in finance, and I'm currently completing my second master's degree in conservation. But back in 2004, 2005, I was writing my dissertation on different ways of financing conservation. And even then, I realized that there's this huge gap when it comes to finance and conservation. At that point, you only really had a few solutions. You had debt for nature swaps, you had a few private loans, you had some securitization, but nothing really, really useful when it came to actually financing conservation. And I set out back then with this bold goal that one day I wanted to make a difference. So I then started working in investment banking as a sell-side institutional equity analyst. And all the time I kept thinking in the back of my mind, I still want to do this thing for conservation. And I started with the development of a financial instrument, which I'll explain in the pitch deck. And I started speaking to the banks I was working for and saying, can we do something with at that stage, socially responsible investing? And there was always this thing of not now, not now, not now. And this progressed between 2005 and by 2017, at which point I pretty much gotten tired of hearing not now. And I started to withdraw from the bank. I started a small consulting firm while still working with the bank. And eventually I started seeing the market edging towards ESG, and there was starting to be talk more of climate change and of biodiversity. And essentially at that point, I decided at the start of, it was actually the 31st of December, 2018, just before midnight, I decided enough's enough, time to actually do what I really, really want. I established Endangered Wildlife, which I'm going to refer to as EW, it's just easier to say. And we basically set out with the initial goal of building this financial instrument. And then we hit this issue, how do you price it? Because essentially it links to biodiversity, but there was no real way to price biodiversity at the time. And we thought, okay, if we can't find a way to price it, we will create the way to price it. And that's essentially where EW came up and developed, with the aim of being able to be to put a financial price onto different species. And I know there's usually a bit of controversy behind it. Is it ethical? Is it not ethical? But as I was explaining to Arthur, I always say, how do we value humans? Do we value humans? And the way I look at it, when we look at salaries, when we look at our education, when we look at credit, when we look at insurance, all of those, we are basically valuing humans on a day-to-day basis. So it came to this thing of, if we can value humans, why can't we value biodiversity? The way I also see it is biodiversity is essentially our greatest trade partner. It's essentially our greatest employer. So to not take into account the value and the worth of biodiversity is basically taking advantage of it. The other kind of way I think of it is, for example, if you're to take something like Nike, which is a premium product, would everyone want to buy a pair of Nikes if they were always basically priced as a budget shoe? So to me, a lot of people take into account value and worth if they see a price tag attached to it. So that's essentially the background of where we came, or how we came to EW. And essentially what we're trying to do is be able to find a way to get people to take more responsibility, to get, for example, financial institutions to take on more responsibility, because once you can start to put a financial price tag onto the biodiversity, then all of a sudden there's a bit of a light bulb on the head that makes you think, oh, I can tell you facts. For example, the southern resident killer whale population of 73 are worth approximately the sixth smallest country in the world. So that population alone can be justified as the same as a country. So once you start thinking of it in that perspective, then all of a sudden you start taking more notice, rather than just saying, oh, this is something that's cute and this is something that I want to help. So hopefully that helps to put it in perspective in terms of who I am and who the company is. And I think I can then start with the actual presentation pitch about the company.
Yep, we can see it.
You can see it, great. So as say, my name is Shana Gavron, and I'd like to thank you for joining this pitch session and for giving me the opportunity to introduce you to endangered wildlife. So in brief, we are an Estonian tech for good, exponential impact limited liability company. We are currently in the process of developing a first of a kind disruptive software solution that basically allows a user to calculate the financial value of an individual or multiple species of biodiversity in the user selected location. So what that means is, if you're interested in the value of a species in Utah, then you can actually find out that species in Utah and not just America in general. We've already valued over 100 species in more than 25 locations, and the aim is essentially to target that $1 billion ESG analytics market. So why should we be concerned about valuing biodiversity? Well, essentially, we are currently facing the 6th mass extinction. And I'm sure you know all the tragic and sad stories that are going on, and the fact that we are critically dependent on biodiversity, but somehow we seem to always take biodiversity and nature for granted. But there is this clear shift, which is to me a very encouraging sign, of the consumer who wants to become more eco-conscious and putting pressure onto suppliers, and also the investors who are trying to become more impact-driven or ESG inclined. Now, as I mentioned before, biodiversity essentially plays a critical role for humanity. It provides the world with food, with safety, with security, and I like to emphasize employment. The reason being, we find that, for example, the Bengal tiger employs over 50,000 community members worldwide. So the Bengal tiger alone is like a large corporation. But up till now, biodiversity and nature has essentially been taken for granted and is being overutilized. But what we're hoping is that if a company starts to understand the worth to the economy and to the society of integrating biodiversity into that decision-making process, that perhaps the biodiversity itself will receive greater support. That said, it's still a very, very complicated process and very difficult to actually understand environmental impact, especially when you start talking about species and individual species. So while there are actually solutions when it comes to things such as carbon, nobody yet has really targeted or tried to develop a tool that is specific for biodiversity. So this is essentially where we come in. We are trying to resolve this issue of providing a tool that can be used for biodiversity. So we are developing what we call the Biodiversityvaluator software, which allows users to calculate the financial value of an individual species, say, in specific locations. It is the first financial valuation software tool that would be able to do this and allow the user, whether you're talking governmental level, investor level, corporate level, NGO level, or private individual level, to actually financially quantify biodiversity, the value of it, and the value of the impact. It integrates essentially a combination of environmental statistics, environmental economics, pure finance, and pure statistics. And we're using machine learning in the backend to allow this to become a more automated process. In the first, and actually in terms of progress, we are actually providing our first live demonstration of our biodiversity MVP next month at the GITEX Future Stars in Dubai. So why is this important? Essentially, what we're trying to do is contribute to the new SFDR reporting requirements and actually add more than what's required. We're also trying to help companies be able to assess and analyze corporate projects in alignment with biodiversity and help investors to better understand the impact. And by being able to financially quantify impact on biodiversity, you can actually then start to use this to interpret by impact in a more traditional, understandable, and comparable basis. So for example, where you're used to calculating a return on investment, by being able to put a financial value onto that impact, you can actually calculate an impact return on investment. So the Biodiversityvaluator is actually only phase one in a much bigger plan. As I mentioned, I've actually developed an institutional investment grade financial instrument, which makes biodiversity itself an investable asset class. This is far greater than what's currently out there with green bonds and blue bonds and climate bonds and talk of tokenization. And with the pricing mechanism with the Biodiversityvaluator, we can actually start to develop a market that would allow the financial markets to actually invest directly into conservation. And this is something that's never really been tackled or been possible in this planned scope before. So that's more our long-term goal for endangered wildlife. In the meantime, as I say, we've done over 100 valuations in 25 regions. And the way we've built our methodology is actually so versatile that we have been able to apply it to fish, to mammals, reptiles, birds, plants, insects, arachnids, and we are currently doing our first amphibian. So in case you're asking yourself, how do we value biodiversity? Well, that's a very brief overview of how we do it. As you can see, it's quite a complicated process. And what we try to do is essentially combine very credible and peer-reviewed methodologies in a very novel, united, multidisciplinary way. So it is essentially data-driven, and we always try to ensure that the data is retrieved from reliable resources, and we're setting it up so that it is always traceable, and if somebody actually wants to audit where the data comes from, that audit process will be in place. We've split it up into multiple parts. Firstly, we look at carbon. Carbon is more your mainstream, traditional way of looking things currently. And I'll demonstrate to you why we do more than just carbon on our next slide. But essentially, the problem with carbon is that it's not always suitable. So it's suitable for something like mangroves, for seagrass, for the big forests. But when you come to herbivores, it doesn't really work. Only the megafauna. And even there is a problem in that nobody's really studied it. So there are limitations to carbon. We then look at aesthetic value, a more traditional intrinsic value. We take it one step further. We use social media instead of actual surveys, which is becoming a more accepted proxy. And we actually look at aesthetic value, virtual aesthetic value, and physical aesthetic value. We then take up to 28 economic values, which are based on the specifics of the species. So for something like seagrass, it's amazingly versatile. It can be used for alcoholic beverages, for building materials, for t-shirts, and for insurance. We look at hedge value. This is more of a financial value, which essentially is saying how much would someone be willing to pay to maintain a healthy population above a minimum viable population and below a carrying capacity. That comes together to form what we call a species existence value. Now, in financial terms, that would be similar to your present value calculation. Then to calculate the total conservation value, which is like a future value, we calculate what we coin our impact value, which is if you were to properly manage a population of a species over 30 years, what would that population look like? And once we understand what the population would look like, we bring it back and say, how would that, or what impact would that have, not only on the population, but the other species that cohabitat the same population, also taking into account things like your climate change or changes in water salinity. So it's a very robust, comprehensive way that we are valuing the species. And as to demonstrate the difference between carbon and what we're calculating is, if we to take the Sundari mangrove in Bangladesh, there's just under 200,000 hectares of that. Based on a 30-year carbon contract, it would be worth approximately 550 million euros. But the mangroves actually are so much more. They provide insurance, they provide fish nurseries, and to a lesser extent, tourism. So if you go through that whole process that I described, we find there's another 501 million euros worth of value that's being created by conserving or supporting the mangrove population, which actually currently is endangered. So when it comes to our business model, we see three possibilities essentially. Firstly, we can operate as a consulting company carrying out bespoke research. This is currently where we are, and as we are carrying out evaluations, and as I say, we've written several reports. Secondly, we are looking at licensing and partnerships. We've already started to sign partnership agreements, and actually I have been approached by American ESG data providers inquiring about what can we offer in terms of license opportunities once the software has actually been developed. The third one, which is where I'm aiming for, is the actual SaaS model, where, for example, a company that has to do sustainability reporting each year would be able to use our software in a very simple way. The aim within the next 12 to 18 months would essentially be that you input either a location or a species and a location, sit back, relax, and it'll calculate everything and produce a final value at the end. So you don't need to worry about the stress of actually having to understand the environment, having to understand the species, having to understand metrics, because it's something very simple that everyone understands, which essentially is money. Everyone understands what $1 means. So where do we see ourselves? We are essentially targeting the $1 billion ESG analytics sector, because essentially that's what we are providing, is a form of market intelligence. And this sector has been growing over the last 5 years. We are very much in our own new niche. We essentially are forging out this new niche of biodiversity valuation. While there is this growing number of ESG, carbon, and climate rating companies, the gap sits with biodiversity. So we very much the forefront movers here, and we want to establish ourselves before anyone else really enters the market. And to basically reinforce the fact that we are first movers, I've actually spoken to people like UNEP FI and UNEP WCMC and the French Development Agency, and all of them have told us that we are far ahead of everyone else. Everyone is still looking at measurements. We kind of leapfrogged and went straight for the valuations. So in terms of progress and traction, I think we've done fairly well in the last 12 months. As I said, we've valued over 100 species. We've been working with NGOs. We've done a valuation for a regenerative farm. We've been accepted onto an EU accelerator program. We've been working with an AI incubator program. We've entered into the partnership negotiations, and we're continuously growing our market presence. We have actually become members of several big associations, and we are official supporters of the UN Global Compact. And I estimate we're targeting for, I think it's about 12 of the UN SDGs. In addition to all of that, we have officially published our white paper on the methodology. This has already been requested from industry and academic peers. So far, feedback that I've received is very favorable on that. More recently, we've actually been invited to present and share the Natural Capital Summit, which is being hosted tomorrow. We've also been invited to present at one of the big Reuters events in the later half of November. We also, we've made a lot of progress. We've also become semi-finalists at InfoShare, which is a big Polish pitch in October. The Hong Kong FinTech Week, which is a big Eastern pitch in November. And we're waiting to hear whether we've made it through to the finals at GuyTech's Future Stars also in October. So we've worked really hard and made a significant amount of progress in a very short amount of time. Just as an introduction to the team, we are a very experienced, passionate, multidisciplinary team. We have experience covering finance, environment, IT, economics, marketing, and statistics. And as I previously mentioned, I have over 15 years experience as a sell-side institutional equity analyst, academically got a double master's degree in finance, currently finishing the second master's degree in conservation. And endangered wildlife has pretty much been my passion since 2005. And when, after leaving investment banking, decided to commit myself fully to endangered wildlife in 2019. So at the moment, we are currently holding a seed round to essentially raise between 500,000 and 1 million euros. And this is essentially the reason why I'm pitching to you today. The aim of that investment is essentially to expand our IT department to really accelerate that development of the software. The main reason being we do want to get to the market first, and I've had a lot of conversations with the target market, and they are showing a lot of interest and are asking us for the software or asking us for the licenses. So we really want to push out that software as fast as possible so that we can already start to take that market and gain that traction and interest. So now I would like to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
So that was amazing.